Okay, let me get my screen share going as well. Don't need any audio today. And now let me rearrange my screen. Okay, so SharePoint. So I guess the key thing to SharePoint is most people use SharePoint in its pretty most basic form for just putting content on there. Folders, files, documents, videos and that kind of stuff. Some of us have perhaps made a SharePoint site where we've got some information about our team, our department, possibly a project that we're working on, and have kind of made it into a bit more of a community. So we're going to kind of work through all the different things that you can do with SharePoint, from kind of the basic stuff right through to the more complex items. So I think the first thing to kind of do is break out SharePoint and explain SharePoint is like Office. So learning SharePoint is like learning Office, in the sense that Office is several different things: Word, Excel, Outlook, PowerPoint, and it's growing all the time, the things that make up Office. And we learn all of those different components of Office in isolation. And we use Word for documentation, Excel for data manipulation, PowerPoint for doing presentation, Outlook for communicating. And those, separate things have their own functions and features and purposes. You can use one for the other, but it's a bit harder. If you wanted to do data manipulation in PowerPoint, I'm sure you could, but it's not as good as using Excel for it. And if you wanted to do documentation in an email format, again, you could, but again, it's not the right purpose for it. So SharePoint's a bit like that, in the sense that it is a number of different things that make up the overall product that is SharePoint. You need to pick and choose what you need to use, and there might be things in SharePoint that you never need to use, and you're just happy in the little space of those couple of bits that you do need to use to get the most out of what your purpose of using SharePoint's for. And then you might even need to dip your toe into some of the sort of the more complex areas, such as some of the things like SharePoint Designer and SharePoint Workspace, and they're kind of like things that you can have additional to SharePoint. And I guess one of the differences between SharePoint and Office is that SharePoint is server hosted, not locally installed on your machine, so you don't need to worry about that so much. So the key different areas on SharePoint, you've got 6 areas. And effectively, SharePoint is there to make websites. That's the whole purpose of it. Is it's a website for its use, be that an individual level or through to a public-facing website. And you don't need any special programs or skills to be able to create that, because it's kind of out-of-the-box functionality that allows you to do that. And the 6 areas that we're going to cover are sites, communities, content, search, insights, and composites, or composites? No, composites. That's the one joke that I think I can get into SharePoint, because it's a pretty dry subject. And yeah, I got one laugh, so that's okay. That's all I go for. Just straight to the bottom. So I'm going to talk about sites as the first piece. So like I said before, you can create a personal site just for yourself. I've got like a sandbox SharePoint site that I go in and I just test things out and play around with and learn stuff. I could use it a bit more productively, in the sense that I could link things through for calendar reminders and events and workflows, and being a bit more structured with the data that I'm saving. You can have a team website, and I think we're kind of getting used to this whole a SharePoint site for a team, because when you create in Teams your team, you do get a SharePoint site behind the scenes with all of that kind of functionality, and I think we're getting a little bit more used to that concept. And again, you can have a website for your department, or you can even have whole public-facing websites that are basically built on SharePoint. And the purpose, kind of from Microsoft, really, is that the aim of those websites is for join in. It's to contribute to them. It's to change them, edit them, make them better, improve them, update them, keep them current, and that's the idea of all of those different types of sites, and it's to enable everybody in the organization with the correct permissions and access rights, etc., to be able to contribute to those. So you might have a wiki or a knowledge base, and we talk about that in a bit later in some of the content and community sections. But that's kind of like, the sites. Create sites, as many sites as you want, hundreds of sites, thousands of sites, but have a purpose for them. And again, try and keep to the, don't go out and create hundreds and thousands of sites, because that would be too many. But try and keep to a good set of numbers around that. Let's move on. So communities. So the idea is just basically to help you work with other people. And I know, SharePoint's been around 10, 12 years now, and we're just starting to get used to Teams. So some of the stuff you'll see here, you'll probably think, well, we've already kind of covered this in some of the training on Teams or on Delve or OneDrive, etc. But that's because SharePoint has been here for a lot longer than those other applications and services. So you might see quite a few of these bits. So the idea is to help you to work together. Like I said, you can create knowledge bases or Wikipedias for your company and have it editable by everybody in the organization. So maybe if you've got create some pages about the products that you sell, maybe you allow it to be edited by people that are owners of that product or are ambassadors or technical analysts for those products. So any changes or updates to that product, it can be updated, and you can have that that Wikipedia or knowledge base available to the entire organization or to the parts of the organization that it's relevant to. So rather than each department having their own, fenced off understanding of that product, have it as that shared area that you can, update and keep, adding that content onto there, making it a richer experience for everybody. You can do things like shared calendars, shared tasks lists, discussion boards, and it helps you keep track of all the data and content on there. And you can, we've talked about Flow in the past, but, SharePoint workflows existed before the Flow, or the Power Automate, as it's now called, service. So, if you really get into, it's not even that difficult to get into some of this stuff. You can just add a shared calendar onto a team site, and you can just put all the relevant items that are on there for the team calendar, and you can integrate that with Outlook. Same as the list, there's tasks lists. So again, we were talking about Planner the other day. So it's a similar sort of thing. You can have those tasks lists on SharePoint as well. And I'm not saying that one's better than the other. I think perhaps they're starting to lift out some of that functionality that's in SharePoint up and out into other standalone applications, just to make it a little bit more user-friendly, approachable for people, because SharePoint, I think, is quite, for the ordinary people, it can be quite a scary, complex looking group of applications and functions. So the other thing then is the content. So, we were trying to move as much content as we could out of our home drives onto OneDrive, and OneDrive is built upon SharePoint. We were trying to move things from our networked departmental data shares onto SharePoint, because it's better. It's more accessible, it's faster to search, you're able to manage that data yourself as individuals a lot easier than when they're on those network stores. And you can just basically put it all into SharePoint. And you can have it in, I've kind of got two examples on there. You can have it down in really super controlled areas that have limited access, that have auditing type controls in place, and really kind of, locked down for the purpose of that data. And then the complete opposite end of the scale is you can just have a complete open area that's just a free-for-all dumping ground. Perhaps not recommended, but that is, it's possible. And you can just put it all in there and make it available to collaborate. So there's everything in between is possible, completely locked down. Only 2 people in the organization have access. There's audit controls on there. There's extra log files about things and changes, track changes, that kind of stuff on there, or completely the opposite end where it's just anybody can put anything up and there's no tracking or anything like that going on at all. So that's kind of what you can do with the content, and the content is anything you can put on there. It can be the usual Office documentation, it can be videos, audio files, it can be images, just anything that you can create digitally can be stored up onto SharePoint. Next, we're going to talk about search. Might take a moment for this next slide to load, because I'm trying to trial out a little bit of the funky stuff in PowerPoint. Because again, SharePoint's quite a dry subject, I find, at the moment. But search, so we kind of talked about Delve. If you didn't have the Delve session, search basically allows you to just search everything that's on there, only the stuff that you have the ability to see. Effectively, it's all locked down with the permissions and everything else, but it is a really excellent and complex search engine that's built into SharePoint. It does it all securely, so you can only get people to access things that they should be able to access. And again, if you get a bit deeper into it, you can configure search in such a way that it's all, that dog's really distracting, that you can really get into the details and pin down certain things, especially when you start to use some of the metadata tagging that you can do on SharePoint. Okay, enough of the fun stuff. Onto some serious stuff. So insights. So this is a bit like some of the stuff in Delve that we saw, where if all of your data is in SharePoint, be it within your own individual site or team sites or departmental or the entire organization, it starts to bring that information together to help you to understand it better. And what you can do, it will give you suggestions on things that are really interesting, any news articles, because you can do blogging and news articles and communication and that kind of stuff on SharePoint. It's not just data, documents, project plans, technical delivery diagrams. You can just write blog articles, you can do news posts, and you could have your whole intranet site. The front end of your communication could be within SharePoint, and all that information you can it will automatically do things for you to make more sense of that information. And then if all of your information is in SharePoint, you can then, again, a bit more advanced, you can then start to build dashboards or scorecards around that information that's on there. And again, if you're using the metadata and tagging things, and you've set up that correct taxonomy in the whole system, it can automatically do a number of things for you. It can create Visio diagrams automatically, and it can update them in real time that show you how certain processes or parts of your business and organization are fitting together. So there is, the art of the possible with SharePoint, again, is, at this sort of stage in our understanding of SharePoint. Maybe there's some people that are real beginners in SharePoint. We maybe got, I know we had quite a few advanced people that were SharePoint experts. The possibilities are pretty astounding with this. And that those first 5 is everything that's available within SharePoint. So all of those things that we've kind of just, you've heard me talk about are all possible in SharePoint without anything additional being added. You put in content and data and information, set up structure, set up governance and policy elements, have some people that have got the right sort of additional skills and understanding, and they can start to pull together some of this more advanced stuff. But then you can even get even more advanced with it, because you can extend and customize SharePoint without being a programmer by plugging in additional apps and features from other providers. SharePoint, Microsoft itself has got additional things that you can use, and then there's additional elements that you can add in from other providers. And you can use, like we mentioned before, the SharePoint Designer and even Visio to build custom workflows and forms without knowing any code. And if you do know how to do some code, or you learn how to do some code, then obviously you can do even more within SharePoint. One of the things I'm going to try and do in the next few days is understand how you can use Visio, so you can draw a diagram in Visio of a process flow, and then you can just pump that into SharePoint, and it'll automate that Visio diagram for you. So, if you don't know how to do the coding, you can draw a diagram in Visio. It's similar to how we saw in that Power Automate Flow kind of thing. But again, that's another way of being able to, take control of, how SharePoint works. And, SharePoint can talk with your legacy applications and databases. So you can read the data that's in there and view it in SharePoint, and you can control down the access of that kind of stuff in there. So data feeds through from things like your MI or BI systems, your payroll systems, your personnel systems, that kind of stuff you can pull through and put into there, really. And that's kind of, I thought the easiest way to explain SharePoint was kind of the themes that I've seen is those kind of 6 areas. It talks about how they all work and interlink. And even if you just live in one little area, even if you just live in, say, the content area, and all you're doing is uploading files and folders and documentation and data, that's fine, because that's still helping the overall wider community, community on SharePoint to better understand everything that's going on. And even if you spend months in data or content or in communities, you could never learn anything within any of the other areas. And it's just that whole piece about trying to get involved and understand certain areas. But like I say, if you just put your documents in there and save them, that's just as good, if not better than nothing else. So that's kind of the intro to SharePoint covered. I was going to talk a little bit around lists on SharePoint. So unless anybody's got any just general questions or anything now that they might want to ask, feel free to come off mute or pop it in the chat, and we'll cover those before we go into lists. Okay. So we just say goodbye to the animated 3D stuff on PowerPoint. So on to SharePoint. So the sort of kind of one of the first things to sort of talk about is like I said, you can have many different SharePoint sites in your organization. Often you'll know if you're a member of them because they're where you're doing work, saving files, collaborating with people. But sometimes you can be a member of a SharePoint site that is there's a public site, an open site. So when you come into the normal office.com portal, you can choose the SharePoint application, and then it will load up your view of all the SharePoint sites, and it will show you news articles for SharePoint sites that you have the permissions to see. And then it will show you the frequent sites that you are using, and then it will also suggest other sites to you that might be of interest based on activity or similar working patterns, and just that kind of the relationships that you have with certain people and projects and data. It make those suggestions. So I'm just going to just jump into a where's my test one? Jump into my test one. Because that way, if I do anything wrong, it only affects me. So this is just a SharePoint site that I created just for myself. I think maybe I'm the only person in here. Maybe I've got one other person just to help improve and test things. But lists is what I'm going to talk about to start with. So, well, what is a list in SharePoint? The simplest way to describe it is it's an Excel worksheet. There are some things you can't do in a SharePoint list that you can do in Excel, and there are things you can do in a SharePoint list that, and vice versa. To just say the other way around, you can do things in an Excel sheet, not in a SharePoint. You get the drift. So a list is technically an application within SharePoint. And the way to do that is go up into the settings area and add an app. and then it will just show you all the different things that are possible in your SharePoint. And if there's too many things, you can just use the little search bit at the top. So I'm going to search for list, and what I'm going to use is the custom list. So when I choose custom list, it's going to bring up what do I want to call that list. So I'm going to call this the project tracker, and click create, and then it's going to take me to my site content. So we can jump into the project tracker list. That's the one I've just created. And it's a pretty basic list to start with. It's added one field automatically. It's added the title field. So I can start adding to this list straight away. Up in the top left, I've got the new button. So I can click on that and I can enter in the project title. So I'm going to be really imaginative here, Project Dinosaur, and save that. So I've added one item to my list. Hooray! But maybe I want to add more information to this particular list. So I can click add column. And then it's going to give me some options. So there's some predefined elements that I can choose from. I'm going to add a single line of text, and I'm going to call this description. So that's the name of that column. There's a few things you can customize. Is it single line of, that's the choices we've got from before, and that kind of stuff. And you can add a default value in as well for some of these entries. So I'm going to save that. I'm then going to add a new item. So this one's going to be Project Fish, and this is all about building a pond. Save that in there. If I want to add in to this existing one to edit, I can click on the menu option here, and I can click edit. Or the other way I can do it, because there's so many ways to do the same thing in most of these things, I can select the item, click on the info panel, and then it will load up the properties of that particular list item, and I can just type in here. So this is build a dinosaur, and that will save that in there for me. And then you can add in more columns. So let's add a yes no, and then the column is started work, question mark. It's a yes no option. Let's say the default value is no. Save that as well. That will pop that in there. Again, I can select that particular row, go to the info panel. It's not given no's to those items. As I set the default value as no, but that's because they existed beforehand. So that's why they're not on there. But if I choose to say no or yes, I have started building a dinosaur, that'll appear in there. I can add another one. Sandwich. A sandwich. Full of imagination today, and that's defaulted to no. See there, so let's save that. Now, it's pretty basic, title, some information and everything else in there. But then this is where, an Excel sheet starts off life. It's just got some basic data. And then as you start to add more information, it becomes more complex. Maybe you want to start adding some dates in here of when things are going to completion date. And you could choose the date that you want to say that project needs to be completed by. And then you can start to use the calendar application to start tracking those dates for your team. You can start to use approval workflows for the stuff in here. So if something's been created and uploaded, you can have the integration for any documentation that's created, because you can upload attachments. You can have it automatically send that document over to your manager or somebody for review, and they can review and approve or reject that. And then again, that can automatically update stuff in here. You can get really quite funky with the Power Apps. You can create an application. So if you want this list to be available on mobile devices, so that people using an iPad or a phone or any mobile device they can input that information on a mobile app. You can link this data in with other data sources and services. So lists, I think, are perhaps something we should have used more often. Whenever you're doing some sort of tracking, perhaps putting it as a list into SharePoint is the best way. If you really do need people to see it in an Excel, you've got the option to export out to an Excel to share it in that information. But think about this in terms of, you know, gathering information and then managing and moving forward with that information and data. That's kind of lists at a very high level, just to give people an idea. And they exist within that particular SharePoint site they belong to. So they can be visible by anybody else that's got the rights to see that information. I think we had a question that Peter said about Teams and SharePoint integration. So is there a specific area, Peter, you're talking about that? Sorry, the question came up a few minutes ago.
No, it was just an open point.
Okay.
Given that we had such a good session on Teams and some of the applications in Teams, you've talked about applications here, there is some similarities, and you know, I sense that two products are going to get closer. Are there any useful integrations that we could be aware of now?
That's a good question, and I say that because I can't think off the top of my head of anything other than, you know, SharePoint is the back-end documentation storage for Teams. Some of the automation stuff that you can do from a sort of a Teams and Flow perspective, automatically use the SharePoint stuff. You can add your tabs into Teams at the very top of your team, so you can automatically go to certain elements within SharePoint to see that information. And I imagine there are things that you can do, but off the top of my head, I can't think of, you know, some of the business, you know, specific business case type elements that you can do a lot of the stuff, bring it into Teams from SharePoint. So, like I was saying in the Teams stuff, you know, you don't have to leave Teams to do a number of activities, so it's automatically got that kind of integration with SharePoint behind the scenes. You know, the fact you can see all the files, you can, you know, to a certain extent, you can do a number of actions and edits on the files within Teams without having to go into SharePoint. You can, if you've created intranet pages or home pages or wikis in SharePoint, you could bring those into Teams. You could do alerts. So I was showing earlier on the SharePoint page, you get these news alerts from sites. You can configure it so that Teams gets those notifications as well. So if you know, Sebastian's created news articles here around security stuff, and he can configure that to post that as a news article into the Teams channel as well. So there is quite a lot of ways to, you know, have that data and information that's available in you know, in SharePoint in Teams without having to leave one to go into the other. But you wouldn't be able to have in Teams, you wouldn't be able to do, you know, the blog posts, the news pages, the articles, as well as you can do them in SharePoint. So you'd still need to go into SharePoint to do that, you know, set up those news articles and those blogs, and then feed them back into Teams for the consumption of that information. Hope that covers that, Peter.
Yeah, really, it drives out the point that Teams is the front user interface, and as you say, SharePoint's the engine behind. But some things you're going to have to promote and bring back as links and pointers back into the SharePoint.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, and it's that whole evergreen, constantly evolving process. There's always new changes coming along that I imagine there'll be some things that you can't do today in Teams. You have to go in SharePoint that they'll start to bring forward. Natively within Teams. So perhaps editing lists might be something you can natively do within Teams rather than having to kind of have an emulated web browser tab within Teams that shows you that list. So that was lists. Any questions, observations on lists at all? Come off mute or post them into the chat. Okay. So the next thing we're going to talk about then is organizing data. And there is a huge amount of data in organizations. So being able to better organize data, I think, is one of the things that's probably going to give us the biggest advantages. in in our working practice, in day-to-day lives. So we're used to seeing, this is kind of what we're used to seeing, isn't it? Let's just jump into the T drive, go into we're used to, this is how I'm used to, I know that I follow this path into these folders, and I can get to the files and information that I need to get to. And I have to learn that, and I have to remember that. And if I forget, I have to ask somebody else. And if that doesn't work, I can try the search up in the top. That's not always the greatest. And I think this, I always relate this back to the old physical filing cabinets in the office. So you've got 2 or 3 physical filing cabinets. That one's for IT, that one's for finance. You've got 2 or 3 drawers in each one. Top drawers for the accounts for this year. The second drawer is the accounts for last year, and then projects. And you've got you physically have to remember which folder and everything to go into. So I think that's possibly why this is the way it works in the digital world at the moment. But we don't have to follow that construct of the physical filing cabinet with the multiple folders and the subfolders, and filtering and drilling all the way down into that lowest level of detail. We can do things now a bit more intelligently, perhaps not quite the right word, but it's a different way of doing it. Now, that's not to say that one way is better than the other. Because putting files into folders might make more sense when you're doing wholesale migration of thousands of files, because if you were putting metadata, tagging them with information, I wouldn't want to be the person or part of a team that's having to individually tag individual files and folders with those that metadata. However, there are gains to be had from that. So I'm not saying metadata and tagging is better than files and folders and that construct, but there are pros and cons of each. So one of the biggest things that we can do, and I've just come into our IT collaboration folder because I think most of us are spending quite a lot of time in here, and we're used to knowing where to go. We're used to knowing to look in the particular folder and the subfolder to find the files that we want to work on. However, if we had tagged those files and folders with keywords, we could find them a lot easier. So I think in the services documentation, we created a lot of the documentation for certain applications. So we filled out all these different Word document forms with information about all the different services. And the only way that you can find that is by knowing which folder to go into, or by knowing the man ID or the service name to find it. But we could have added, and I can't do it right now because I don't have the permissions to set up metadata and taxonomy on here, but we could have set that up differently. We could have added in the terms store management around this. We could have added a section that was called, the predefined things that we want to do. So if you think about it from an organizational perspective, the taxonomy that you want to use is across all of your sites and all of your site collections for your organization, for all the business things that you do. So you want to look at what the organizational structure is for your departments, your processes, the document types you've got, the products that you create and sell, the subproducts that make up those products, and what is it that we use time and time again across the organization that we could use for classification and categorization. So I'm probably going to stick to more of the IT kind of stuff that we do. But we could have tagged things relating to say, for example, hotel, or online, or airline, or ancillary. We could have tagged things such as service model, design diagram, business requirements, testing outputs. We could have put things in there around security policy, HR policy, that kind of, those are the sort of labels that we can give to things across the organization. And I'll just quickly show. So in the site information, as long as you've got the correct permissions on that site, All the site settings is where you want to go to view all site settings. Now you get shown a load of stuff on this. So the easiest way to find what you're looking for is to just do Control and F and find, and just type in your thing. So term store management. So I don't have any of the permissions to change some of this stuff, but there's some stuff that's automatically set up for our organization. So for example, people, if you tag something as people, it automatically can be shown these predefined items that we've got. So department, job title, and location. So every people can be given a department, job title, and location. We might also want to add in a grade, or we might want to add in a manager. You know, they're the sorts of things that you could add to that element. So the same way I was saying, we could have documents, so documentation, and then we could give all the different, you know, the 20 different things that a document can belong to. Products can be put in there, so we could tag all of our products. And then that way, you've got this other way of searching and viewing information. So if you work, say, in the marketing team, and you want to find anything that's to do with marketing, you can set up a custom view within SharePoint and show me anything that has the tag, the metadata of marketing. And that view will be constantly updated, refreshed with anything that's got tagged as marketing. So rather than knowing I have to go to this folder, that folder, and then there's my marketing information, or my marketing information is split across 15 or 20 different subfolders, and I've got to traverse through all of them, you know, the tagging, you know, and setting up that taxonomy right from the start can really make it a more effective way of trying to manage and search for data. So that was kind of, you know, I can't show you too much because I don't have the permissions to set things up on here, but, you know, you would just literally right click on this taxonomy element, add new, and then you could choose what you want to call that grouping. So for example, there's a Git one here, and then you can add in the those particular elements that you want to add for that particular tag, and go from there.
I've got a question. Can you have, because you just gave an example of marketing, can you search on 2 items?
Yep.
Yeah. Okay.
Yep. So
or
you
3?
could, you know, so yeah, so you can have,
Yep.
you know, I don't know if there is a limit on what you can search for, but yeah, when you've got those, the best way to do what I was talking about, you can do a search just through the any old search type of thing, but these are attributes given to that item within SharePoint that have those tags, so you can search for those tags. So let me just jump back into SharePoint, and then you can create a custom view. Let me go to documents, come on. So yes, you could tag to say, show me anything that has these values. Let me see if I can so you'd create a new view, and the menu that I was expecting to see isn't shown on there. But yes, you can, Paula. I can't demo it for you right now because I can't remember where it is on the new version. I could switch to Classic and show you, which won't help because we want to stick in the new modern view as best you can. But yes, you can create a new view, and then in that view, you can say, show me information that is tagged with those relevant items you want to choose. And you can do it on the fly as well. And unfortunately, we've not really been tagging things with this, so I can't even do a ad hoc search at the top for that.
Thank you.
So any other questions on kind of the metadata tagging, taxonomy, files and folders? Okay. So SharePoint workflows. So that's the last thing we're going to talk about on the session. So this is where we've talked about the flow and the Power Automate application in the past, and this kind of is similar to that, except for it's unique to SharePoint. Just go back to my sandbox site. And they're basically, if you think about flow, when you configure that flow, it's a pre-programmed little mini service or application that you've created to automate the thing that you want to automate. I think there's an example they've got in the help on here actually. Data and lists, I think it was. No. Workflow. SharePoint workflows. No, not that one. Here we go. So I don't know if you guys can see that too clearly. You can see the rough thing here, but you can basically set up a flow. So this is the kind of the graphical map of what the process is. So this is talking about document review. So there's a start function where the document arrives. So that's a document is created or uploaded into a specific area in SharePoint, and it triggers this workflow. So a certain set of criteria need to be met, but then it will trigger this workflow. So that document will then get sent to the reviewers. So in this particular process, it's going to send that document to review. Now, again, you can configure how that's done. Is that attach the document to an email, just send an email alert or a notification in the workflow center for the reviewers. So the first thing that's happening here is Anna needs to do the review. So Anna can do the review of the documentation or the data or whatever it is. And then through the actual SharePoint workflow, Anna will approve or reject that piece of work. So that can be done through a list, or it can be done through the automation in the workflow. So if she rejects that, it then basically gets marked as the document's rejected. So the document can be flagged or moved or deleted from the SharePoint site to show that it's been rejected. If Anna reviews in this step, it then goes across to Sean to do the review. Same thing happens. They do the review, they do the approval or rejection. And again, the same thing happens. It'll get tracked to say the document's been rejected. You set up what you want to happen next. And if the approval occurs in this step, it then goes for the document to be accepted. So if it's accepted, it might be that then that gets published as a major version in the version controlling. It might be that it gets moved or published to another area within SharePoint. It might send out certain alerts to people. But effectively, it helps that whole process. So it's, if I've created that document and I've uploaded it to SharePoint, that's my job done. I don't have to then go to Anna and say, hi, please can you review this and let me know once you've done. And then once she lets me know it's okay, I then go to Sean. So that kind of delay that gets added into the process, or that kind of human element of it is removed, and it can be automated through this whole set of processes. That whole process and all that checking and tracking is automatically done. Auditing and logging is there. It just basically just removes out any of that human element of people being away or forgetting or missing it. It's you don't have to proactively monitor it. It just happens automatically because it's all running itself. And you can choose the type of workflow that you want. Within workflow, when you create them, there's various templates that you can use for some of the simple sort of more common tasks that happen in there, and just go from there really. I know we've got some quite complex workflows that have been set up on other SharePoint sites, where customers could contact in via email, and then that receipt of the email would trigger a task in a list on a SharePoint site, and that task would then be assigned out to a colleague. The colleague could do some work on that particular piece. They could assign it to other people. It could then automatically alert them. And then once it's all been resolved and closed, you could have a response sent back out to the customer, or a template of a response created for somebody else to send that on after a review. So again, there some similarities with some of the things that we've seen, but this is stuff that's been within SharePoint for several years, and it's just trying to highlight that up to you guys about what the possibility is around this. It's not just a document repository. So any questions or queries or observations on the workflow side of things? By no means I'm an expert in that, but I can try and help or cover it off or pick it up to discuss at a later point. Okay. There's nothing on that. I'll end the recording there, and then we can just stand the line if there's any more Q&A around SharePoint in general.